Fatah in Hebrew is open, to open, and the passive command comes out as Efatah, be opened, and it applies not only to the infant, but one still does that over as one opens the senses, it applies to us, the senses. Right now, I'm preparing a book for printing on the issue of the soul. This morning I drew up a note on the nature of the soul, and it's something that concerns each person walking on this planet right now. We all have an immortal soul, and there is a difference between its modalities of existence in the body and that of its existence separately. And part of my thing went in the direction of proving that it can exist separately. And that's something which might puzzle the average scientist. And yet, as I pointed out this morning in drawing this together, it's science which is on side. I think you can have some idea how and why. Because of the progress of science, a lot of very intricate surgery takes place. And there is on YouTube a lot of documentation about things discovered when there is a state of clinical death. There is one spectacular case documented by the BBC, no other. It's that of Pam Reynolds. And it's something which is quite spectacular because science there is dumbfounded before the findings. And the main surgeon of this terribly delicate operation goes on this documentary to indicate how puzzling it is. And he himself draws the conclusions, neutral and just balanced as a scientist that he is. It's this: because of the place of the aneurysm in the brain, completely inaccessible, in a place that never had to handle before, there's only one possible way out of this, he thought. It's clinical death, it's brain death, draining it of all blood and keeping the person somehow alive, in inverted commas, at least functioning physically for the rest of the body, the heart, soul, but the brain must be completely dead. And so it was. And they were able to monitor it, that's the point, they were able to monitor it. And they could see, at a certain point, there was no more brain movement at all, it was brain dead. And then they began to drill. And there was also, at the same time, a drama going on in another part of the body. There were things going on which were technical and which, and this is the point, after the long operation, the departed soul, observing it, was able to report detail by detail. And because the operation was so long, that soul also began to move on, away from the operating theatre to the beyond, and met deceased family members and so on, and then, unwillingly, because she was in a good place, had to come back. The operation worked. And the conclusion of this good, excellent surgeon, as a scientist was, that actually puts in question the whole classical principle that the operation of the soul depends on the brain. Do you see how important that is? Well, we are right now still on this side of death. So our opening of the senses is the opening of the channels to the soul. Right now, our soul does operate via the workings of the nervous system, the sensory system, and the brain. We perceive all through the senses, unless we have special gifts of sensitivity or some kind of charismatic gifts where the Lord can give direct knowledge. Don la science, when the knowing comes suddenly out of the blue, And that is something which one finds in authentic charismatic renewal, when actually the gift is there, accompanying oftentimes healing and so on. But that's not a question. But just to be aware that we're not limited when it comes to the things of the Spirit. There is also that realm there, which is a real one, knowledge, given to some people who have gifts, classic in the life of certain saints, not that far from us in time, Padre Pio, but many, many others. I want to come back. This question of input and sensitivity, it's actually very important in human relationships. While we are on earth, we have essentially a choice. Will I go through my short existence in this mode of maximalizing my sensitivity and therefore input, or maximalizing my output? And that is a big difference between different types of soul. There are quite a few on this planet who all the time have things to teach others, but they are blocked in their volume of knowledge. Why? Their sensory system is not functioning. There is noise coming out of them. And if anything contrary comes to them, they will raise the volume of that noise. And that actually is what happens, for instance, in poor theological debate. Noise! It happened in the Reformation. I was just picking up this morning something which is both frightening and consoling at the same time. With regard to the Reformation in England, and therefore also later on in Ireland, it was based on enforcing against the will of many people a way of thinking which was not theirs. And for those who were fully aware, for instance, high quality intellectuals in the universities, it was a problem. They were having to struggle and conform. I told you before the story, and it's true, of this lady, a simple person who wanted the truth, and went to Oxford to find a known theologian who had a good culture and theological baggage, and got him and pinned him. Reverend Father, I know you are a man of God, that you have a great theological knowledge. I will ask you one thing. What is that, madam? Upon your soul, I will ask you, in what church must I live? That of the king, or that I was brought up in? And he looked at her and said, good lady, I will tell you. Because of the present inconveniences that surround us, the church in which one must live is that of the state. But because you ask me upon my soul, good lady, I will add, the church in which you must die is that of Rome. And with that, he turned on his heel and disappeared. Not long afterwards, he was going down the corridors of Lambeth Palace, no less, to talk to the Archbishop of Canterbury, the new head. And as he went to have a cup of pontifical high tea with him, he fell to the ground. He knew but didn't have time to make up for what he knew. Now, that may just seem one story amongst a million, but it's happening every day. People who have this notion, I'll get my act together. And they're blocking out what's trying to get through to them. In fact, I'll give you at the end something which happened linked with this church. I believe yes, the date is actually here. It came back to me because we had the anniversary. On the 15th of August, the Assumption, just before the COVID, it was in 2018, I took a somewhat handicapped lassie, not from here, but from another place, to her brother, who was good to her. And it meant a journey to Delvin. So I left her with her brother, who was actually kind to this somewhat handicapped girl. Waved goodbye to them in the car, and then the next contact I had was a text. Patrick is no more. Not long after I'd waved goodbye, not on that journey, but on the following one, because he'd gone out to get something from the chippy apparently, he got propelled over the hedge into a field, and that was the end of Patrick. Now, I'm not quite sure why. I have a feeling, but I'm not sure. He may have been under the influence of some substance. But anyway, that was the end of his journey. And I wrote this, which I'll give to you afterwards, because it's happening, my friends, every day and by the thousand. For good people and unprepared people. There's one redeeming quality in that man. It's the fact that he was good to his handicapped sister. May God be merciful to him. But so many surprises can happen. My mother was telling me some years ago how in this course over the weekend in Bala, it's a theological centre, there were young ministers and candidates doing some scriptural course in the college over the weekend, and they were taking notes with laptops. And one of the young preachers was on the landing with his laptop, and he was in some high theological debate with one of the confreres, and he was warming up, but he has a laptop in his hand, warming up. The laptop went over the banister down. Now he knew all his precious notes were in that laptop, and he was keen on rescuing it, so he tried to rescue it, and over he went from the third floor, and that was the end of him. Be prepared. On the way here, I pass every time at least 5 trees growing slowly by this plaque which remembers those children killed near here, in the bus, in wet weather. They also started a journey in a different planet altogether, and weren't at all thinking that was their last journey, nor were their parents who said goodbye in the morning. I want to come back. Here we have these who knew the issue when it came to dialogue, and how they found themselves up against a barrage of noise, which in their case took also the form of noise inside the body. They had ways and means of getting them to think otherwise. I just happened to pick this up before coming. They were trying to get the top. The authorities were in pursuit of the nuisance of a Father Robert Parsons. They also wanted Edmund Campion. He'd had audacity to publish the famous Bragg and also the Decim Rationes in England itself. And Father Parsons was responsible for that last publication. But they didn't manage to get them at that point. They got accidentally another catch. It's St. Alexander Bryant. Now, he was cast into the Counter, a plain prison, not equipped with modern methods of extracting information. A simple method of torture, therefore, was used: starvation. Maximilian Kolbe. Thinking he would die of thirst, Father Bryant tried to catch rainwater in his hat, but he could not reach out to the eaves of the building. After 6 fruitless days, he was transferred to the better equipped tower, and there loaded with exceedingly heavy shackles. Because he would not confess where he had seen Father Parsons, how he was maintained, where he had said Mass, and whose confessions he had heard, they caused needles to be thrust under his nails, whereat Father Bryant was not moved at all, but with a constant mind and pleasant countenance said the Psalm Miserere, desiring God to forgive his tormentors, whereat Dr. Hammond, one of the examiners, stamped and stared, as a man half beside himself, saying, "What thing is this?" Noise. Picking was a torture usually reserved for witches if they seemed insensible to other pain. This failing to elicit the desired information, Father Bryant was thrown into the pit, a subterraneous cave 20 feet deep without light. According to a fellow inmate, he knew about it. After 8 days in the pit, he was put directly to the rack, where he again revealed nothing, and so was returned to his cell. Now it goes on to great detail about this racking, which went on, and he was still of joyful countenance, to the infuriating nerves of the torturer. He, under torture, would simply say, "Can't you do better than that?" On it went, until it became clear that they could not extract anything at all. All they could do was make a joke of it. The executioner, the torturer, boasted that he'd managed to make this priest 1 foot longer than his maker had made him. And on went this pattern for years and years in the Tower of London. Basically, what is going on? It's what Pope Benedict talked about when he made a very controversial statement in a lecture he gave at Regensburg. His philosophical lecture was a very balanced bit of academic work, and it was on this point: the truth is its own defense and needs nothing stronger to convict itself and others. Basically, it was malinterpreted by the Islamic bloc because they precisely use other means, but it applies also to this period, when one has recourse to all this extracting, all this obliging to think otherwise. What does it mean? One is losing. And it's also the case, more subtly but the same, in any theological conversation where one has to have appeal to higher decibels. The truth defends itself, and it's a bad sign if one raises one's voice. I return to where I started. It also applies to the whole of life. There are a few couples who go through life never ever raising their voice. They know a lot more about each other than couples who always have to have a lot of heavy conversation to make a decision. Which do we want, my friends? Strangely enough, the Beatles had a lot of wisdom in some of their songs. If you see it your way, there's a chance that we will fall apart before too long. Try to see it my way. We can work it out. Life is very short, and there's no time for fussing and fighting, my friend. I leave you. We only have one innings. What do we want? Noise or reception?